Sorry, and also we wanted to make sure that people could get the email receipts, as well as to be able to make it simple to print the receipts for those people who couldn't receive printed receipts. So we're going to talk a little bit about some of the settings and some of the decisions that go into actually setting up the automation for that. And I might talk about Relay, which is the email tool that we use to send out our the information for the receipts. But I'll kind of talk about the different components. So we've worked with a couple different clients to set these up. And the basic components for this are creating a preference or some type of a variable on the constituents record to be able to override their eligibility for an email. So we did a couple different things when we're looking at eligibility. First, in order for somebody to be eligible for receiving the email receipt, they had to have an active email address in one. And if they had an active email address in one, we would make an assumption that they wanted to receive the receipts in that manner instead of getting a printed receipt. So that in general, that works. Now, you may have already asked people whether or not they would like to receive an email receipt or not, or maybe that's one of the things that you want to ask before you start this process. So we needed a way for you to disable them or indicate that somebody with an active email address should not get an email receipt. So a preference of some sort, a user variable, a user group, to identify that even though they would like, they're eligible, they have an active email address, they would like to get the letter instead. So I'll talk about that a little bit later. That's one of the things that we need to make sure is set up. The other thing that we set up was a reprint option. So we have all of these processes that are going to be running every day. One of the processes is going to kick off and it's going to generate emails to go out and tell somebody or give them access to their receipt. We have another process that's going to kick off and produce a printed letter for the receipt. And we wanted to build into that process the ability for you to go on to an individual's gift and identify that you wanted that to be included in the process again, in a reprint scenario. So both of the scheduled jobs that run, both the one that produces the email receipts and the one that produces the printed letters, those are generated based on any gifts that were processed on that day. So this runs at night, so it'll look at any gifts that were processed during the day. We also wanted then to give you that ability to indicate on a gift that we wanted to have that particular gift get reprinted, and then it would get picked up in the process, just like the other, just like the email and the preferences for those two processes. It would get picked up automatically. So you don't have to have a separate report that's out there running to do reprints. If we have the flag set on the gift, it will automatically then process that as either an email or a printed letter based on whatever their eligibility is. So emailing receipts is, in this case, a relay alert that runs every night. So it's a query that runs and looks at gifts that were processed on that day, and it will produce an email campaign that will go out for those that are eligible for emails. Likewise, we will also be looking at those people who do not want an email receipt or those people who don't have a valid email address, and those people will receive a printed letter using a Crystal report, and we'll send that to the virtual directory so that that can be picked up by your people who are going to be processing the letters. There will be a PDF sitting there waiting for them in the morning. They just print off the PDF, stuff the envelopes, and send the receipts out. So this is what we're trying to accomplish, is these steps of sending out an email receipt and sending out the letters. So I wanted to walk through the process of what your users are going to experience when they get an email receipt. So I've chosen to, instead of trying to create a receipt in the actual email that they get, to instead send them an email to let them know that their receipts are available and have them go through the process of accessing the My Giving page where they can see all of their historical gifts and print the receipts from that page, since that's a really great use and a good reason to get them actually registered. So that's the process that we're going to look at. So there were really two different things that were going to be happening. If somebody made a gift and that person was going to be getting their receipts online through, getting their receipts through an email, they would get a message. And this is a message that we prepared for East Carolina that was customized, that indicated who the person was and thank you for your gift. And this particular campaign was going out to people who had already registered for CCON or had already gone through the process of registering to receive their receipts. So it was just as simple of click on this button for view and print receipt. When they do that, it would take them to their login page where they would put in their user ID and password. Now we do require that somebody logs in at this point because it is private information and we don't want that login information embedded within the email, so that if that person were to ever forward that email on, I wouldn't want their credentials to go along with that email. So we ask them to log in again. And once they log in, they'll be taken to their My Giving page, because that's the link that we put into the email. And they would get the My Giving page. And I'm just showing you a small portion of this, but now they can see the gifts and payments that they can print, and they can click on the Show Receipt button, and that would produce then the receipt for them to print directly from home. The second thing that could happen for one of these donors is they had not registered yet for CCON. And what we're doing then is we are evaluating at the time that the email is going out whether or not they have a user ID and password for CCON yet. And if they don't, they'll get a little different message. So in this message, we indicated we thank them for their recent donation. It's still customized to them, but instead we included additional information in here about why we're going to a non-printed receipt and the steps that it takes in order for them to become a registered user. This may be an option that you don't use, but in this case, we used a video that they can watch that walks that user through the steps that they need to take in order to register, hopefully to make them more comfortable with the actual process. So we embedded a video, and this just walked them through the steps where they're going to be putting in their receipt ID, last name, and email address. And that information should be populated for them already, so that when they come into this form, all they need to do is provide us with the password that they'd like to have for their CCON password, verify their profile information, and then they're going to be taken to the My Giving page where they can print their receipt. So they would get something like this. They could view their instructional video. They would click on Confirm Profile. Then they get this page, which is already populated with their information. And all they need to do is put in their password and password confirmation. And then they can click on the Register button, accept the terms and conditions. They're given their profile, which they can then verify. And you can control how much information you include in this particular form that's delivered to them. And then in this case, we added a button to click here to open my giving receipts. And then that brought them in where they can then click on the show receipt button. Now, this is one of the paths that you can take. This was so that we can drive them into the My Giving page so that they can get used to seeing this page. They already have their user ID and password then to be able to log in and get their receipts whenever they would like. So that's the basic access or the points that I want to talk about as to what your users are going to be seeing. Let's go back to some of the other preferences. So I mentioned at the very beginning that we wanted to be able to set up a user variable on the constituent so that we can, if we want to, we can disable someone who's supposed to get an email receipt because they called in and said, boy, I'd really like to get that as a printed letter. You can certainly do that. One of the other things that are available to us is to, instead of having us manage that all in-house, we can utilize another function of Constituent Connection, which is called Web Forms. And Web Forms let us publish a set of options that can be available to our constituency. And we can send out an email, or they could log in and have access to it from CCON. But what I'm encouraging people to do is to create these web forms, and prior to turning on the campaigns to send out their e-receipts and or end of year receipts, which can also kind of follow this same kind of methodology, is they would send out an email to everyone who has an active email address, and within that is a link that brings them to this web form, and let our constituency manage their options for how they would like to receive their receipts. So let me give you an example here. So within one, I've created a user group. Let's see if I have it listed in here, or if I just have it in user codes. And I have a user group called, actually I have two of them. One set for what is their receipt preference, their daily receipt preference, and another one that's set up for what is their receipt preference for year end. Gives them two different opportunities to make those choices. I have this one set up. So this is a user group against each of the people that are in your database. And right now, Bob Wolf does not have any preferences. So institutionally, we could come in if somebody were to talk to us about giving us a receipt preference, and we can just click on the add button and set the preference to don't send a gift receipt or send the receipt by mail. By default, it's going to be set to, we will treat a no entry in the user group the same as having a preference of email. I'm not actually going to set that at this point, because what we would do is send an email out. So if we go now and look at web forms, which are going to use that control or that user group, and there's a web form in here. And the web form has a label. So how do you want to receive your gift receipts? We have a small HTML section that you can use to give the user, or so they can understand what's happening on this particular page. We are using the user group of RCPTD, which is the receipt daily preference. And I'm only letting them pick one option from that user group list. A few other HTML sections, but that's good enough for now. What happens then is if we send this URL out to our donors, it might look something like this. So we'll send the email out prior to kicking off this sending out email campaigns or email receipts, and ask them, how do you want to receive your gifts? Explain what's happening, and then let them pick their option. So if I would like to send each gift receipt by email, I can go ahead and choose that or leave it blank. Notice in my notes I said if no preference is selected, we'll send your receipt through email. And I can save this. So again, this is our donors that are doing this. I'm going to try to figure out who I am here. Okay, so in one then, if we go back and look, I'm going to try to find Dave Brimmeyer's record. That's how I was logged in the system. Or logged in CCON. And yep, we can see that a user group record has been added. And his preference has been set to send each gift receipt by email. So what this really gives us the ability to do then is we can continue to ask them every so often what their preference is, but that also gives those users the ability to come in at any time. And I'm just going to pretend like I'm getting another email, or if I created a shortcut or a bookmark when I received this. As the donor, I could come in and say, you know what, I really don't need a gift receipt at all, and save that. If we go back into one and look at that same record again, we can see that now the active record has been changed in one to not send a gift receipt. So all of the queries that I'm using to determine whether or not I should send an email receipt or whether or not I should create a printed receipt in this example are being managed by this particular, whether or not you have an eligible email address and whether or not you have some kind of preference set in these user codes. If you don't want to use user codes, that's fine. As part of configuration, we can simply use a user variable field. What I like about using the user codes is it puts some of that control back into our constituents' hands and lets them control what their preferences are for sending out receipts. So that's kind of what we need to weigh, is whether or not that's something that we would like to have set up. So I mentioned the fact that we're going to be sending out the email, and I showed you kind of the steps that we would go through to do that. The other side of that is what we're going to be doing with the printed receipts. And the printed receipts, they run again every night, and instead of including the people in an email campaign, those gifts would be used and put through a query and through a crystal report, so that when you came into work in the morning, you would come to your virtual directory folder, which is right here. And we would see in one of these folders a file that had all of the receipts that were produced the night before, so that you can simply print them and stuff those letters. The other thing that has been included in some projects is a report that you can add to your home page. And I don't even think I have an example of it here. The report on your home page gives you an idea of how many email receipts were sent out the night before and how many printed letters were created the night before. So you can look at this dashboard and determine whether or not there were any emails that went or how many printed letters, and also whether or not any reprints were sent out the night before. So there's quite a bit of setup that goes into creating these. The good thing about automating this process is that once you turn this on, the emails automatically get sent. Your receipts are automatically put into the virtual directory, so it's simple to print them on at the next day, and you don't need to manually decide what's going to email and what's going back to the virtual directory for printing. Now, I left a lot of the absolute detail, all of the selection wizard queries that we have and the crystal reports that we have. And I don't know if any of you can actually speak, but does anybody have any questions about what the general process is? Just checking to see if anyone's typed in here. So this is something that can be implemented by us if Agilon, if you want Agilon to work on creating the queries and the crystal reports. The nice thing is that the report that you build, the crystal report that is available when somebody prints their gifts online, is typically very similar in its design to the design that we're going to be using for our printed receipts. So there's a lot of synergy between the receipts that are printed and what they'll actually produce when they go to the My Giving page to print out their receipts. And then there's generally some versions of those crystal reports so that while you're doing gift entry, you can also double check to make sure that the formatting is all okay with the receipts that you're printing or that you're going to possibly be printing out. Well, that is all I have for reviewing the actual project of creating online receipting and automating of your receipt process. If you have additional questions and if you're having trouble with audio, please feel free to contact either Amanda or myself about setting up a specific call where we can talk about what the project might look like for your organization, either starting now or something that we might want to move into in the future. So thank you for joining me today, and I hope that this was useful in getting your wheels turning on how you might be able to automate the process.